Well, today marks 10 years since 26 people were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. 20 first graders and 6 educators lost their lives after a gunman with an AR-15 rifle opened fire in their school. CBS News national correspondent Nikki Battiste sat down with 2 Sandy Hook parents who told her about their final moments with their children.
Dylan was this gorgeous little boy with these gigantic blue eyes. He was always smiling and laughing, and he had this really high-pitched, sing-songy voice. He was just an absolute joy. I still can't wrap my head around that it's 10 years.
On the last day of Daniel's life, he, out of the blue, before we went to school that morning, he asked me to show him something on the piano. So I taught him how to play Jingle Bells. That was in the last few hours of his life.
And Nikki is here with us in Studio 57 to tell us more about these interviews that she had with these parents. Nikki, thanks for being here. It's just incredibly heartbreaking to hear the sort of the mundane, teaching a child how to play the piano, how to tap out a song on the piano because they want to know how to do that. And then you say to your child, you know, when you come home, we'll do more.
Right.
And then they never come home.
Yeah.
I mean, what do they tell you about not only the lives of their children and their loved ones, but what's changed since then?
Nicole Hockley and Mark Barton, whom I've spoken with several times over the last decade, remarkably, after losing their young sons in the most horrific way, nothing's worse than the loss of a child, together started Sandy Hook Promise. And what Sandy Hook Promise, it basically is devoted to protecting children from gun violence. In this past decade, they have a crisis center in Florida set up with hundreds of counselors ready to receive calls and tips. They've stopped at least 11 credible school shooting planned attacks, which is remarkable because they received tips from students and they were then able to alert the schools. So they've been at the White House fighting for new gun legislation. They've devoted their lives to Sandy Hook Promise, and there's been real change. They're in 23,000 schools teaching what they call their Know the Signs programs. They teach children and adults, school staff, basically how to look for at-risk behavior and intervene to get help.
That is a really important message to get out because, you know, when we do the stats on mass shootings, it feels like nothing is working. And here you have a program that is actually working. But of course, you need lawmakers to get on board. So you spoke to Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy. He's been among the legislators trying to fight for public safety, trying to limit the number of people who are injured through or killed through gun violence. I want to play some of what he had to say.
For me, the last 10 years has been about trying to rattle this country into understanding that the epidemic of gun violence is every day. There are over 100 people dying every single day from suicides, from homicides, from accidental shootings in this country.
You know, here's the thing. Often after something like this, it feels like we take a couple steps forward and then like 5 steps back, right? What has happened over the last 10 years in terms of legislation, government involvement, anything to make sure that we don't see more Sandy Hooks?
Senator Murphy said, look, it's been a long road, but there was big success this summer with the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was passed just a month after the Uvalde school shooting. And it includes a lot, but it includes enhanced background checks for people ages 18 to 21. It invests money into mental health resources, and it provides funding for red flag laws to states to have red flag laws, which basically allows authorities to take a gun from someone that's been deemed dangerous. So it's the biggest gun legislation in 30 years.
It's good, but it has to be applied.
Right.
And so often we see that, you know, we have this stuff on the books and then people fall through the cracks because it's not, you know, they're not applied.
Right. And the one thing that I keep thinking about, Nikki, is we report on school shooting after school shooting, mass shooting after mass shooting in synagogues, in churches, in supermarkets, and sadly in schools, is that, as Anne-Marie pointed out, very little changes. And there are some baby steps in the Safer Communities Act, and some states have banned those AR-15 style rifles, assault rifles. But I want to know how Sandy Hook itself is doing. I mean, I think there was a sense that in this country, once those babies were killed, that there would be meaningful legislation enacted. And not leave it up to the parents, as noble as their intentions are. You're leaving it up to the victims to create organizations that try to prevent this, as opposed to the government that is supposed to protect its citizens. In Scotland and other countries, when they've had, in Australia, when they've had mass shootings, the country is galvanized into action to ensure that those things don't ever happen again. And here, all we do is talk about it, we report on it, and politicians get on TV and talk about things that are associated with gun violence, like mental health,
Which is
but
all
not
good.
the number one issue, which is access to weapons.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to point out there, as you mentioned, there are a few states that have banned assault rifles since Sandy Hook. Connecticut was one of the first to do so. So the state took some, active steps. But I think Newtown, I can't speak for the Sandy Hook families. I've spoken with several of them over the years. I think everyone is at different stages in their grief and their trauma. But as Nicole and Mark said to me, while they want everyone to think about their own children when they're thinking about gun safety, gun legislation, that is critical. But today they really just want us all to think about the 20 students, those beautiful first grade faces, and the 6 educators that lost their lives today. They said this is a day of remembrance.
But and part of that remembrance, Nikki and Anne-Marie, is the understanding. I mean, you are both parents that this is a country where when you send your kid out the door, the possibility exists that that child may not come home because of gun violence. And I don't know, I lived in France, I lived in Nigeria, which is, not always, it's a wonderful country, but not an easy place to live. I've lived in other countries where people worry about a lot of things. But the one thing you don't worry about is when you put that kid on the bus that they might not come home because of the things that we're facing here.
Yes, my son is 2. I know you have a young daughter. You're about to be a dad.
Yeah.
It's constantly on my mind, and it's a real threat. Happened just in Newtown, Connecticut, which is the last place you would ever expect a mass shooting in an elementary school. And I should point out, 85% of mass shooting deaths are at the hands of an assault rifle. Mark and Nicole and many of the other Newtown victims' families would like to see an assault rifles ban. They say they respect the Second Amendment. They're not asking for all firearms to be taken away, but they would like to see assault weapons taken away. I asked Senator Murphy about that. That has been his mission for a long time. And he said, look, that day is coming. This is a movement, and he really does believe that is something we'll see. We did have an assault rifles ban in this country from 1994 to 2004. Statistically, it does show that in that time there were fewer mass shootings.
Right.
There's a lot of
And they
context
let it
to
expire.
discuss. But
They let it expire.
So, it's a really polarizing topic, but and Nicole, Mark, and I talked about this. There's so much that goes into keeping children safe in schools, to protecting kids from gun violence across the board, suicide. There are a lot of aspects. Guns is certainly a big one. Mental health, just people recognizing behaviors.
So true. Nikki, thank you very much.